I very much trust Travis Goff, and I very much believe that Travis Goff is the right individual to steer Kansas through this sort of uncertain environment. Pay heed, all who enter, and beware of this podcast. That's right. This is the Pay Heed podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, and I am joined once again by Kevin Flaherty, looking noticeably tanner after his trip to Mexico. He was out there doing the yeoman's work, scouting for future talent for Kansas basketball because there's no regular talent. They got to go international. So we had some special reporting from Kevin down in Mexico, live from the beach, looking to find anybody that would be willing to play basketball in Lawrence, Kansas for KU. So we'll get into that. We'll touch on more KU basketball stuff as well with some real updates, actual updates, not just fake Kevin updates, real updates. And also a little bit of news on the revenue sharing side. Something that's been looming for a while was finally passed on Friday, kind of a late Friday night news dump on Friday nights that will certainly alter the landscape of college athletics. We'll touch on that a little bit, what it could mean for Kansas as well down the line. Of course, this show, as always, is brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. And if you have not already, please subscribe. Apple, Spotify, and our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. We're striving for 1,000 subscribers. We're getting close. We're getting close. So if you have not, please hit that subscribe button on YouTube. It's one click. I mean, what are you waiting on? It takes one click. It's less effort than Kevin tanning in Mexico. Seriously. So click that subscribe button, and please leave us a 5-star rating and review. You can find us on social media as well to stay in touch with the show. Lots of ways to contact us, and be sure to drop a comment on our YouTube channel as well. We love hearing from you guys. Kevin, how was the great trip to Mexico?
It went pretty well, except for me dominating my wife in the trivia competition there. I tweeted that out. It was major controversy in the Flaherty household. We were staying at a Hard Rock resort, and they did a trivia thing where you could win a prize. And the question was, how many seconds or what's the time on the famous song Welcome to the Jungle? And my wife guessed 4:32, and me being both a strategist and a jerk, I picked 4:33, right? Because that's what you do to box your wife in. And making matters worse, Nick, that was the exact time. Welcome to the Jungle is 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And so my wife 100% would have won, except that I did that strategy thing and came out on top. So needless to say, little smoothing had to happen. Some feathers maybe getting out of place a little bit, but we made it through and had a really good trip.
Well, I was going to ask you, was it like Price is Right rules where, if you're over, you lose, or was it just closest? Or
no, it was just closest. It was just closest. Okay. And so it was it was kind of funny though. I boxing her in on that part, and but literally my entire logic was, it's got a pretty good size intro. It's fairly long. I would probably bet on the longer side of 4:32, but apparently not by much. By 1 second was all you needed.
Wow. Well, hopefully everything's all right. Hopefully the fallout from that wasn't too significant on your part. But yeah, we had a great show with Derek Johnson while you were gone. Shout out to Derek for filling in. Yeah, I told Derek
reviews were probably way better.
Well, I told Derek I was really scraping the bottom of the barrel for guests to fill in for Kevin. But yeah, we got it done. It was good. It was a fun show. So check that out. We got a little bit of insight from Derek as well, but certainly glad to have you back, Kevin. And why not dive into it a little bit with KU basketball and where things are at right now with Kansas. The bad news is KU still needs to find 3 spots at this stage of the offseason. We're into the second week of June, and Kansas still has 3 spots. Even you could make an argument that they could be still looking for a potential starting spot at the wing position. At the very least, you need another body in that area. We had a chance to hear from some of the new players for Kansas. KU did a little bit of thing along with Jacques Vaughn. You can check out what Jacques Vaughn and Bill Self had to say last week over on a YouTube channel at Kansas Jocks KCSN, but also had a chance to hear from the new players as well. So got a chance to talk to Darren Peterson a little bit, Melvin Council, as well as Jaden Dawson with and also, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the big man, Tiller, Bryson Tiller. Jeez, a little rusty here. He was there, and so got a chance to hear from those players a little bit about where they're at. And KU has started doing some camp. If you follow Kansas on social media, you maybe seen some tweets and some video clips of KU basketball players doing things. So that's pretty cool. But still looking for 3 potential spots at this stage. And the biggest issue is that it appears as though Kansas will not be having its cake and eating it too. And that is in reference to one Bryce Desert, the French big man. No bon appetit for us, unfortunately, as he was seemingly somebody that KU was pretty far along in the recruiting process with. And it seems as though with these international players, you have different issues that can arise with that type of stuff, with
student visas and
all kinds of stuff. So for one reason or another, without speculating too much, it sounds like maybe that might have fallen through a little bit. He's 22 years old, so maybe there was some eligibility issues. It's really hard to say exactly what maybe the roadblock was, but that has maybe kind of fallen through a little bit. So that would have been a piece you would have liked to have as a big man. And then earlier in the day on Monday, Patrick Sumnick, who had visited Kansas about almost a month ago now, committed to Seton Hall. So another name you can cross off the list. So from a big man perspective, it's already looking pretty thin. Obviously, from the wing perspective, it's looking pretty thin. I'm not really sure where Kansas goes at this point, to be honest.
Yeah, Dessert would have been perfect because he was a high energy big man, right? And that's kind of what you want behind Flory for the 10 to 15 minutes that he's not in the game. Is you want somebody that's going to come in, play like their hair is on fire, rebound, defend, and bring some of those things. They don't have to be perfect, but if they have a high motor, and in that case, you're talking about a guy whose motor, the things that he can do at 7 feet tall, made him sort of a fringe NBA guy. And so having that guy as your backup obviously would have been perfect. I don't know. Is it done yet that it's no? Last I saw Nick, it was trending sort of in hey, this may not be as likely, but it's still possible type of deal. But
yeah, I mean, without getting into the weeds so much on what the various issues may be with players like that, right? It's one of those situations where you just wait until it happens or it doesn't, right?
Yeah,
but you never know what kind of roadblocks there may be, or paperwork, or holdups, or XYZ, especially at this stage of the process, right? Maybe if it was a little bit earlier, it would be okay, but it's kind of hard to tell at this point, truly.
Yeah, and now with the revenue sharing part signed off on, where all of your NIL stuff needs to go through a clearinghouse, there's no longer just, hey, we're going to write you a check for $3 million to come play for us. That's kind of out the window, or at least, and I know we're going to get into this aspect of it, at least on the surface, people aren't going to be writing those checks. It could be a little bit of a return to, money in a McDonald's bag for certain people, type of deal. But in this specific case, yeah, I mean, you're 100% on. Like the options are looking pretty dried up at this point. That doesn't mean that there's nobody. It doesn't mean there's not going to be a reclassification. It doesn't mean the perfect international guy is not going to fall into your lap. I feel like we mention this every show. You got a break for probably 1 week with Derek here, but Johnny Furphy was an August guy, that they added. And so it's not looking great right now. I think the one positive thing that you would say, though, Nick, is, and I'm not saying this is everything, but it does seem like the reviews on the guys who are currently here, how they feel about each other, how they're getting along, what people are saying about them, is really positive at this point, whether it's Melvin Council, whether it's people talking about, hey, Darren Peterson is as advertised. It does seem like that aspect of it is going about as well as you would hope for.
Well, and I think that's always been the underlying theme of this offseason is that we've talked about it. I think in a vacuum, you look at what KU got in the transfer portal and you'd say, hey, you went out and got some really, really solid players that are going to fit into the KU culture really well.
Yep.
Like Melvin Council is a perfect example. Jaden Dawson is a perfect example. And hearing from those guys and them saying, yeah, I got the call from Bill Self and I was immediately bought in. I was all in, right? Like you hear those guys say that and you think, okay, you've gotten players that are the right fit, right? And I think that's been overshadowed by the fact that you've swung on some bigger names and missed, and you're sitting here in the second week of June and you feel like you still don't have a fully completed roster yet. But when you look at what KU already added, yeah, it's very impressive, I think, and I feel really confident in the players that KU has. When you talk about Council and Dawson and Trey White, and then you throw in a Flory Badunga, who you said was maybe KU's biggest quote unquote get out of the transfer portal, plus Darren Peterson, like absolutely, I think Kansas has done a really good job, and truly, Kevin, Kansas kind of did exactly what we were asking them to do, which is don't worry about going out and getting like the best guy or the highest rated guys. Just go find players that are going to fit in. And I think they did that. They definitely did that with the players they have. The problem is they were set up into which they needed more, and they haven't maybe hit on a bigger name that would fit in as well that they had the chance to. And listen, anytime you have multiple really high-end prospects, I mean, you're talking about Dame Sarr, who was ranked as a 5-star, and then you talk about Darian Williams, who was consensus one of the top players in the transfer portal. When you miss out on those two guys, yeah, it kind of puts a damper on things. But overall, you have to be pleased with what KU has done, I think, in the transfer portal. Just maybe not quite enough considering the circumstances.
Yeah, you brought up the social media clips that are starting to kind of surface, from them practicing and working out together. I get that they're quick clips. It's, hey, here's 10 seconds of this or 15 seconds of this. But just seeing the way they interact with each other, Nick, does it not seem like this has a chance to be a really close-knit group? I mean, I believe the kids would say, not being a kid myself, you're a lot closer to that. I believe the kids would say vibes are high at this point.
You got that correct. Shockingly, old head Kevin got that correct. Yes. Yeah, and I mean, I think we talked about it during the season last year. There were plenty of games where it just didn't look like last year's team was having fun. It didn't look like they were enjoying being on the floor together, right? For various reasons. And obviously losing contributes to that. When you're losing, you're having a lot less fun, which Kansas is used to winning, certainly. But yes, I think your point still stands that it feels as though this team has a chance to maybe have a little bit better of a mentality. And I think that goes back to the players they brought in. I mean, with the dog food stuff, with Melvin Council, him, bringing that in, and Jaden Dawson talking about how committed he is. And obviously Darren Peterson is going to be a guy who will be an alpha player both on and off the floor. So absolutely, I think you look at what KU has in place and you feel pretty good about it. You're just maybe still missing an extra piece or two. And at this point, it's kind of hard to see where you go. I mean, international continues to be seemingly the at this point, not only is it the best route, maybe the only route, truly.
Yeah.
Considering the circumstances. One other guy that was sort of on the radar was Abdelas, the wing. It sounds like he has committed to Virginia Tech, I think, or had an agreement in place with them based off of him coming out of the NBA draft. If he chooses to do so, the deadline for international players is a bit later, so I think you can probably cross him off too. So in terms of specific names, it's kind of hard to say at this point, right? I mean, look, last year, you mentioned Johnny Furphy. Last year in June, nobody even knew who Johnny Furphy was. So this will come down to the staff doing its due diligence in terms of scouting, in terms of understanding the types of players that they still maybe need to add to this roster.
Yeah, and I think, too, as you start to get a better feel for the guys who are already on campus, maybe you get to a point where you say, hey, we don't need a guy that's going to carry the scoring, but we do need a catch and shoot guy. And maybe you're able to find somebody to fill that specific role. We talked about the backup big man role and kind of what you want there. And so, you can get to a point where everybody wants you to go find this mystery guy in Greece that you didn't know about yesterday, but you watched his tape today and you're 100% sure that this guy is the next Luka Doncic. But I think that the more realistic thing is, hey, they're starting workouts, they're practicing. Like you said, there are still some holes in that roster. Maybe you find out, hey, these are the things that really need to get addressed, and you can find guys that fill those specific things versus, hey, we're going to go out and get a guy that's going to be an All-America candidate.
There was a little bit of other news from last week I wanted to touch on, and then you also teased it a little bit. The House settlement was signed officially on Friday night, so we'll talk about that, touch on a little bit more news coming up on the other side. Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
Success in real estate takes more than vision. It takes the right financial partner. When someone takes something rundown and turns it into something great, that's called a comeback story, like Brain Group. They take distressed properties here in KC, completely rework them, and then turn them into valuable real estate. But that kind of work needs the right bank behind it. Enter Emprise Bank. They're not about cookie-cutter loans. They saw Brain Group's vision, backed them, and now they're making big moves in Kansas City real estate. Talk about your partner in possible. Emprise doesn't do one-size-fits-all financing. They invest in potential and back growth. Visit emprisebank.com/KC to learn more. Emprise Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
Folks, it's playoff time, and if you're still just watching the games, then you're missing out. With Pick 6 from DraftKings, you can turn your hoops knowledge into real cash. Just make your picks, track your score, and if you hit all 6, you're looking at bigger payouts than Prize Picks flex plays. Nobody's dropping better payouts than Pick 6. Hit 6 picks, and that's 25 times your cash. And if you beat your competition, you could be looking at a 500 times bag in your pocket. And right now, new customers can get $50 in bonus picks with just a $5 entry. Here's what you got to do. The playoffs are on, so why not take a shot at making a little money while you're watching? Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app right now and use code KCSN. That's code KCSN to play $5 and get $50 in bonus picks. Better payouts, bigger wins, only on Pick 6 from DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdictions. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 bonus picks that expire in 14 days. Limited time offer. Terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer along with Kevin Flaherty. If you have not already, please subscribe. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen to the show, watch the show, drop a comment, share your thoughts, join in on the conversation with us. Tons of ways to connect with the show as always. So please do all of that stuff if you have not already. We really appreciate your support. We're getting close to 1,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel. So hit the subscribe button. It's one click away. Go ahead and knock that out and take care of it. So mentioned it before the break. One other piece of news from last week we didn't get to touch on as you were in Mexico on vacation was Kansas basketball officially released its non-conference schedule for this upcoming season. And you look at the schedule, Kevin, it's once again a very difficult schedule. And Bill Self, I think, has really proven over the past handful of years that that's what he likes. He wants his teams to be going up against some of the best teams in the country during non-conference play. And that's going to happen again this year. You've got the exhibition at Louisville at the KFC Yum Center in Louisville. That's on the schedule. And then you look at the regular season, you're going to play the Fighting Doug Gottliebs out of Green Bay. They're on the schedule. You go at North Carolina, Texas A&M Corpus Christi, who was a tournament team from the South 2 years ago. They were in the playing games, I think, a couple years ago. You also add in Princeton, who has been a tournament team who made a deep run, if you recall, a couple years ago in the NCAA tournament. Duke in the Champions Classic. You've got the Players Era tournament in Las Vegas. You're going to play UConn. You've got a game against Missouri at home. You will go at NC State, which should be an interesting game considering Will Wade's first season, and Darian Williams will be there. Obviously, a player that Kansas is familiar with for the wrong reasons. Then you also play Towson and Davidson. So that's a non-conference schedule for Kansas. Again, very, very difficult. I mean, you're talking about a schedule that features numerous teams that have been Final Four teams, national championship teams over the past 5-6 years, plus some really, really good mid-major teams that have made NCAA tournament runs as well. So that's once again what Kansas' non-conference schedule is shaping up to be, is that this team, as much as we talked about it before the break with some of the new players, they're going to have to hit the ground running more than likely.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to be battle tested before you even hit Champions Classic. Like that's the crazy part about it. When you look at the exhibition against Louisville, which obviously won't count, but will definitely be a chance for you to test yourself. And then the game at North Carolina. I mean, and then, you've got the Duke game, and then, the Players deal, and then UConn, I mean, it's just, there isn't a break. And I think it's really interesting, Nick, because I do think when you look at this team's chance to be really good, I do think it's still there. I think the eye of the needle, so to speak, is smaller than it would have been, obviously, had you gotten to Darian Williams. But you look at it, right, it basically stems on Darren Peterson being who everybody thinks Darren Peterson is, Flory Badunga being a first-round NBA draft pick big man, which is there for Flory, and then the other pieces kind of fitting in together around those two. And the only reason I bring that up, Nick, is you do have a lot of newer moving pieces that are trying to fit in, and that's a really tough schedule for them to try and find some footing. And on one hand, you say, hey, you can maybe not play all that well, and if you have a couple really good results that maybe you don't even expect, like, hey, UConn comes in and you beat UConn by 15 because everything's clicking in that game. That could be the game that you look back on and say, hey, that's when they figured out that they could be that type of team. The flip side of that is, Nick, if you wind up being like 2-5 or something over, those 7 or so tough games, maybe you really struggle to find a way to build momentum. And so I do think, I don't want to say it's a gamble necessarily, because that may be too strong, but I do think that there is a sort of an interesting weighing and measuring there between, hey, these guys need to get battle tested, these guys need to figure things out, and also they need to build confidence and build chemistry and all the things, to get to where you want them to be in March.
I mean, it's not at all unrealistic that Kansas could enter conference play with 4 or even 5 losses.
Yep.
I mean, that's a real possibility, which is somewhat shocking to say, but it's really, again, a reflection of the difficulty in schedule. I mean, you're talking about North Carolina, who obviously KU played in the national title game, just over 3 years ago, and has been a really solid team. You've got Duke, who was obviously in the Final Four this past year and has always been a really good team. You've got UConn, who was back-to-back national champs just a couple of years ago. You've got Missouri, that game is at home, but Missouri obviously much improved last year. We'll see what they do this year. And then you have a game at NC State, who has maybe one of the most exciting young new head coaches in the country over there in Raleigh. So
Players era, obviously, too.
Yeah, plus the Players era. So that is a very, very tough non-conference schedule. And again, I think it's one of those things where you could look at it and say, hey, if you get through that and pick up a couple of huge wins, right? Maybe you win at NC State, you beat UConn, maybe you beat a Duke or whatever, and you can say, all right, well, that is really, really good to see. You can go forward. Or it could be where there could be a pretty strong learning curve, and you do enter into conference play with 4 or 5 losses, and you got to figure things out from there. So, it's a very tough non-conference schedule, and it's not surprising that is the case, because again, I think Bill Self has shown over the past handful of years that he prefers it this way. And truthfully, I prefer it this way too. Like I would rather Kansas go play UConn and go play Duke and go play at NC State rather than playing 8 cupcakes in a row that gives you nothing before you get into conference play.
Well, and speaking of the conference play thing, Nick, like we've been talking about the players era. For those of you who don't know, that's kind of a Thanksgiving time period, like one of those. Here are the teams in that thing: Alabama, Auburn, Baylor from the Big 12, Creighton, Gonzaga, Houston, Iowa State, KU from the Big 12, Michigan, Notre Dame, Oregon, Rutgers, San Diego State, St. Joe's, St. John's, Syracuse, Tennessee, and UNLV. And so depending on what your matchups are there, you can wind up facing another Big 12 team there. You could wind up facing a team that's one of the top few teams in the country, depending on how you face Auburn, St. John's, one of these different teams. And so it's definitely a formula that's going to lead to you getting tested. And I think we'll find out pretty quickly. Your point was, about how last year's team, even when things were going well, they didn't always seem like they were having fun. We're going to find out if these guys like each other, pretty quickly, I feel like this season, because I think there's going to be chances for things to go wrong, and how do they respond to that adversity?
Yeah. And with the players era, you mentioned all the teams there. That's sort of basically the new NIL version of Feast Week, essentially. Like it's kind of replacing what would normally be like a Maui or a Bahamas or something like that. It's kind of essentially the new version of that. So if you're somebody who enjoys the Feast Week, participating in those types of tournaments, that's probably going out of fashion a little bit, especially for top programs who recognize that they need to generate as much NIL revenue as possible, which we're actually going to be talking more about that in just a second as well, with some of the recent news there. So that's kind of the new take on sort of the Feast Week tournament. It takes place in the same time period, but it's kind of a new-ish view on that, I guess, so to speak. But as you said, many, many tough teams will be in that tournament as well. So with the non-conference schedule shaping up as it is, again, critical that KU gets the ball rolling early, if possible. So, okay, speaking of the House settlement, speaking of NIL, a major shift could be on the way in that aspect. We'll touch on that, how it could affect KU, and more coming up next.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible. Member FDIC. If you have not already, please subscribe. Apple, Spotify, wherever you watch or listen to the shows. You can find us on YouTube at Kansas Jocks, KCSN as well. Okay, so Friday night, a little bit of a late night situation here on Friday. The judge officially signed the House settlement, and it is a very, very confusing, convoluted thing that is occurring. So I've tried to distill it down the best that I can in sort of a NIL for dummies here that I'll try to get through, and then I'll love to hear your thoughts, of course, Kevin, as well. But sure. To break it down, I think essentially when you look at it from the Kansas perspective, from the Power 4 program perspective, I think really it kind of boils down to two key things from this settlement that are going to be major impacts on how on NIL and all this works going forward. Obviously, the sort of buzz phrase is revenue sharing. What exactly does that mean? Basically, it means that every school now is going to have for lack of a better term, a cap essentially on how much the school can share with its student athletes. To start out, it's going to be around $20.5 million. So that'll be $20.5 million that every school around the country, if they generate that much, will basically be able to take up to that amount and share it among their student athletes. Now, the key here is that encapsulates obviously football, men's basketball, women's basketball, every sport, even down to your non-revenue generating sports. So your women's tennis team, your rowing team, your track, everything. It encapsulates everything. $20.5 million that can be split up essentially however a school wants, I think. And this is where you'll see different schools take different approaches. in the actual House settlement, there was somewhat of a template they laid out where it's basically 75% of that money goes to football, 15 to 20% goes to basketball, and then you kind of divvy up the rest to all the other sports. So that's one method. There's been Texas Tech was pretty open. Actually, there was an interesting story about Texas Tech being pretty open about saying they're just going to give almost all of it to football, like 90%. And obviously Texas Tech is in the spotlight in football for having a very expensive roster as it is. And so that's one aspect of it. And I think when it comes to Kansas specifically, this will impact KU, I think, quite a bit differently than sort of your, I guess, for lack of a better term, generic Power 4 school. And what I mean by that is Kansas is in the unique position that I think for most schools, they'll say, okay, football is going to get obviously the significant lion's share, basketball will get whatever, and then we'll go from there. With Kansas being a blue blood basketball program, being a basketball program that is top 5 in the country historically, they are in a position where you're probably wanting to give a little bit more to basketball. Basketball is probably going to be demanding a little bit more than maybe your average Power 5 school. And so that is one area that I'm intrigued by with this particular sort of aspect of the House settlement. And then the other big aspect is the actual NIL clearinghouse, the NIL Go clearinghouse. Deloitte is going to be sort of this third-party company, and they are basically going to be responsible for approving all third-party NIL deals that are over $600, which obviously is a lot. And so there's going to be, I think, a bit of an interesting process here unfolding where you basically have to submit your NIL deals. And obviously this aspect of it is primarily focused on eliminating a donor writing a $3 million check and giving it to a player and then the player playing for that school. That's basically what it's supposed to eliminate. It's supposed to be, hey, great, you've got an NIL deal with, whatever, Joe's Auto in wherever the hell. And they're going to give you
I don't want to cut you off, but like I've said all along, what NIL was supposed to be was Jared Casey with Applebee's.
Yeah.
And you catching the 2-point conversion against Texas, he has an Applebee's commercial, about gotta go for 2, and all that stuff. It's more, that, having the Mad Greek, like having offensive linemen talk about how great the lasagna is, and using name likeness like that versus a straight, like you said, like pay for play. We want this quarterback recruit, so we're going to pay him $5 million to come here.
Yeah. So obviously there are tons of questions that come with that, which is how is this Deloitte group going to really enforce that? What's the process going to be of getting that approved? Is it going to sort of drag things out? Is it going to slow things down? And also a big question is also, how are they going to really monitor that? Like, what's really to stop schools from just essentially not reporting whatever deals they don't want to be reported? And then is Deloitte going to be responsible for going out and, tracking that down and ensuring that? So there are lots of questions. And I think depending on who you maybe look at or how you maybe look at this, this is viewed as a good thing or a bad thing. If you follow Travis Goff on social media, Travis Goff has been pretty outspoken about his opinion of this, which is that he views it as more of a positive thing. It seems like now, I think the optimistic view I would say is that this is better than what has been transpiring currently.
100%.
The optimistic view is, hey, it's a step forward, right? It's obviously probably not going to be perfect, but it's a step in the more right direction, I guess, of, as you said, what NIL was supposed to be and maybe how it's supposed to look like. But obviously, then the pessimistic view would be, well, there's been under the table stuff happening all along. Like, it's going to continue. What's really to rein in? I guess the point of it that I find it to be where I would look at it that way is there isn't really seemingly going to be a true enforcement arm of this process. And that, I guess, is what concerns me is like, okay, you've got this outline and it sounds great if everybody plays nice and if everybody, submits their paperwork and crosses all their T's and dots all their I's, but like, is that realistic? And if schools are going to circumvent it, which I think probably it's safe to say there's no doubt that will be the case. What is the process of enforcement going to be like? Is there going to be punishments if you don't submit these deals? It opens up sort of a Pandora's box of possibilities. But getting back to Kansas specifically, and I talk about the revenue sharing. I want to get your thoughts on that, Kevin. The revenue share, it's a big deal, right? Because these athletic departments now have to find a way to raise, first of all, that amount of money, right? And then split it among their student athletes. What kind of an impact do you think that will really have on Kansas, and maybe in the short term? Obviously, and for KU, their situation is even more unique because of the fact they're trying to also finish building a football stadium.
Yeah,
there's a lot of layers to this that impact specifically Kansas in a unique way.
Yeah, I think so, and I think to one. You made a really good point in that I do think that this is about 100 times better than the previous system where it was NIL in quotation marks, which was basically you're worth whatever a booster is willing to pay you. And so, hey, if school X, wants this player for $1 million, they'll write him a check. And that was never what NIL was supposed to be, but that was kind of what it became in that whole Wild Wild West thing. You made some really good points. I think ideally this is a major step forward in the right direction. My question is that whole saying that ever since people started, keeping score, people have been finding a way to cheat. And so, no, you're not going to have a public NIL deal for Nico, to play quarterback, but I do think that you're kind of opening the door again for the don't ask, don't tell, SEC bagman type of days, because the thing about it is it's supposed to equal some things out, right? Like, hey, if you've got a cap, you're probably not going to pay Jeremiah Smith at Iowa State or at Ohio State. You're probably not going to pay him $9 million a year out of your revenue share. But the flip side of it is they're still going to find a way to make sure Jeremiah Smith gets paid, and if you can do that above board where it's, hey, Nike wants to do an ad with Jeremiah Smith and it's above board and all that stuff, great. For some other guys though, where maybe they don't have that name recognition, they don't have those things, you're still opening it up, I think, to have sort of that under the table dealing where people are going to pay more for it. I love that you brought up basketball because I think we've talked about donor fatigue on here. We've talked about a lot of different things with Kansas doing the football stadium, and fans don't want to hear this, but right now with the way college sports are and the landscape and realignment, football is more important than basketball, because basketball is not going to lead to you getting saved in the next round of realignment. You have to prove that your football program is viable, that you can bring TV sets in football, that you can do all of those different things. And so I'm very interested to see what Kansas's split is going to look like between basketball and football, because I do think on one hand, to your point, it's not like Kansas is going to let basketball get left behind. But the flip side of that is Kansas also can't afford to, say, take a major chunk from football and needs to make sure that football has the ability to strike. I think the other things that make this really interesting, Nick, are when you look at the revenue sharing combined with the new roster limits, and you look at even the cost of funding scholarships beyond revenue sharing and things like that, and which athletic departments are going to be able to do that. Because basketball and football, sure, great. We've had Dan Fitzgerald on our show multiple times. When you look at what Kansas baseball is going to have with the new, what does baseball go up to now? Is it 34, I think, maybe? Or
yeah, I think it can
go up to.
Yeah.
Kansas is not going to go up to 34. Tennessee, LSU, other
Vanderbilt,
they could go up to 34, and that's not necessarily part of the revenue sharing part of it, but that is a part where some athletic departments are going to struggle to find money to go in all these different pots, and how hey, can we fully fund this? Hey, can Texas Tech afford to find a way to, to pay a Deidre Kennedy or somebody like that in a non-revenue sport like that? And so all of those are going to be questions that need to be answered. And when you look at revenue share for football, I think the interesting thing for KU is going to be doing that revenue share and divvying that up while carrying probably still around 85 scholarship players. And when you look at some of the people that Kansas is going to be competing against, let's say just like Texas, Texas has more money than anybody. Texas is going to be at 105 scholarships, and they're going to fully fund that. They're going to spread that out. Other SEC schools, because Texas is going to 105, guess what they're going to do? They're going to go to 105. Can Missouri get to 105 with revenue share and things like that? And most people are going to say, well, I don't care, but you're playing Missouri every year, right? And so how does all of that work out? Where does it become something where Missouri is operating from a place of advantage over you when you're playing them every single year? Kansas recruits against Nebraska a lot based on proximity, all of those things. Nebraska, we all know what Nebraska thinks of their football program, what their fans, what their boosters think. They're going to go to 105 to make sure that Ohio State isn't sitting up there at 105 all by themselves. If you're a kid in Kansas and, KU's kind of like, well, we're not quite sure if we can scholarship this guy or not, and Nebraska says, hey, we can throw you on full scholarship, we're at 105. There are different areas in addition to just the revenue sharing component of it, where there are schools that Kansas is competing against, recruiting against, that I know that they've said, hey, this revenue sharing thing maybe should take the haves and the have-nots and kind of bring them a little bit more even. I'm not 100% sure, Nick, when you add that to the roster limits, to some of the other things that they've talked about here, that maybe there isn't even a little more gap between the haves and have-nots. And that's not just to say Ohio State and Texas to Kansas, but what's it going to look like from Kansas to Central Michigan? I mean, they're both Division I football schools. They're both FBS schools, not Power 4 schools necessarily. But what's that gap going to look like? Is there going to be a gap between Kansas and Iowa State? And I know that doesn't, most people would say, well, no, they're Big 12 schools. Why would there be a gap? You look at the revenue that Kansas is bringing in, the revenue that Iowa State's bringing in, it's not the same thing. And so Texas Tech being in the Big 12, what's their thing look like? You mentioned them earlier. And so all of that is a really long way to say, I'm not sure that it does clean up the whole like haves from the have-nots. It's better than what it was, where nobody has any idea what anybody's making. People are throwing out, just wild quotes to, the media, like, oh yeah, Texas's roster is $40 million this year, where Texas is even, wait a minute, no, it absolutely is not for $40 million this year. You're going to be able to track some things a little bit better, but I still question, by the end of the day, when we're looking at this 5 years from now, 7 years from now, are we going to say that it really helped bring, the two sides closer together? Or are we going to say, hey, this was something that maybe even separated things further than they already were?
The other thing to note on rosters, what you were talking about, is walk-ons are going to be grandfathered in. So if you were previously a walk-on, you can maintain that basically. But yeah, the walk-on situation, I mean, I know with you being so much in the weeds on recruiting, high school recruiting, a lot of kids that maybe would have a chance to be a walk-on at a place like Kansas or Kansas State may not be able to now under the new system, which is a real shame, I think, and a real bummer in a lot of ways, because
do not take Jared Casey.
Yeah, exactly. And especially, Kansas State being an example of a school that has had a long history of guys that have been walk-ons that have been really good, and Kansas obviously as well. So that's kind of a bummer. And it's also kind of a bummer because that part wasn't really 100% sure that was going to happen. So over the course of the spring into the summer, we've seen some walk-ons depart Kansas, some walk-ons depart many other schools under the expectation that they would not be grandfathered in. And so that kind of is shaking things up as well. So that's something else. And then the other thing about this situation with the revenue share is, it's something that I hadn't mentioned yet, is, and you touched on it a little bit towards the end, about fair market value, right? Like, who determines what the value essentially of a player's name, image, and likeness is? Everybody knows that Jeremiah Smith is worth more than probably any, you know what I mean? Like any, but like, what's the dollar amount? What's the dollar sign value of that? So that's going to be a discussion. Like, who decides that? What aspects of that are calculated into that, whatever that supposed number is? So that's something to keep an eye on as well. But yeah, I think from Kansas's perch overall, I would say a couple things. Number one, I very much trust Travis Goff, and I very much believe that Travis Goff is the right individual to steer Kansas through this sort of uncertain environment of NIL, of all this, right? Like, I think he very much is the right individual to head the athletic department to do so. So I have a lot of faith in him to sort of guide Kansas in the best direction possible in this process. I think two, Kansas is going to be set up in the near future very well, considering you will have completed the football stadium. Kansas is already the school that's generating the most amount of revenue in the Big 12 when you look at some of the recent numbers. So that's significant. So I think Kansas is going to be situated okay. I wouldn't say great, because they're not in the Big 10 and not in the SEC, which, if you're in one of those conferences, you're definitely in a good position. But I think, considering the circumstances, Kansas is in a pretty decent spot, I would say. And I have a lot of faith in the current leadership to continue to guide KU in the best direction possible.
Yeah, they've been planning on this for a while.
This hasn't come out of nowhere.
Yeah, and I think that there were some athletic departments, Nick, that you could tell were kind of proceed with caution. You know, is this going to happen? Is this not? It really feels like Kansas has been planning on this for a while, and is something that they thought a lot about. I think really unfortunate, obviously, the layoffs that happened in the athletic department, that was leading into this. Kansas is not alone in that. I didn't know if you saw today, Michigan, I think, maybe had a press conference where they were talking about how they were going to deal with all this. And one of the things they said was, we're going to cut our athletic department down by 10%. And so Kansas has been preparing for this. And to your point about Travis Goff, I don't think any of this caught them by surprise at all. And so if they're out here saying, hey, this is a great thing, you know, we think this is really going to work, I have a hard time believing they didn't research this thing from all angles, because I know it felt like the second revenue sharing was even mentioned. It felt like Kansas was already talking about, okay, what's this going to look like? How are we going to handle this? And how are we going to come out, you know, really well from this process?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I do think there's been, as you've said, there's been a lot of schools that have handled things differently, right? Some schools, especially when you consider like the transfer portal process of basketball, some schools have kind of been business as usual. Some schools have been, we're going to empty out our coffers and spend as much money as we can to get ahead of this possible house settlement. Some schools have been a little bit more cautious in that area. So there's lots of ways to skin a cat, I think. And I think we'll see that continue to unfold with this house settlement, because again, there are guidelines that have been set forth, but I think most schools can kind of decide what percentages they want to go where, sort of on their own merit. And so you probably will see a lot of schools approach this in different ways. And again, I think Travis Goff, even going back to 2021 when they had Mass Street NIL, I think KU has always done it at the forefront of what they consider to be the best practices.
Yep.
And so I would expect that to continue. I think in the short term, I don't know how much it'll change. So this will, it really goes into effect July 1st, essentially, with the start of the new like fiscal year. For those that don't know, most athletic departments, most schools around the country operate on a July to June fiscal year. So the fiscal year starts in July. So that'll be, I think, when we'll see maybe the impacts of it. And I'll be curious to see what that looks like going forward. So Really good conversation there, Kevin. Really good dissection of where KU was at in sort of the college athletics landscape. So good discussion. You got anything else to add before I think we go ahead and wrap up the show for today?
No, I think we touched on it quite a bit. I'll be interested to see over the upcoming weeks and months. I'm sure we're going to get a chance to talk to Travis Goff publicly, probably here pretty soon, and kind of hear specifically what some of Kansas's plans are for how to deal with this. But this was not a surprise. This was something that they saw coming down the road, and it was something that they prepared for.
What else is not a surprise is that Kevin did a great job in his return from Mexico. No rust here for Kevin. What also should not be a surprise to you is that you need to be subscribed. Apple, Spotify. So you are not surprised when our shows come out because you'll get notified. So subscribe, Apple, Spotify, and on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. Drop a comment, share your thoughts, join the conversation. We love to hear from KU fans. We love to continue to grow our KU fan community. Really appreciate you, and we are very excited for the upcoming season with football. It should be a lot of fun, and we'd love for you to be a part of it with us. So really appreciate it if you have already done all those things. If you haven't, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and do it so you can join us for the remainder of this offseason and into football season as well. Until next time, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.